The cold water of Lake Mercer closed over Marcus Reeves' head as he sank beneath the surface. His lungs burned. His limbs, once powerful and precise, now failed him. 20 minutes of desperate swimming had drained the last reserves of his strength. The stolen diamonds, sewn into the lining of his jacket, pulled him down like anchors. Above, police searchlights cut through the darkness. The rhythmic chomp of boat engines grew louder. "I can't die like this," he thought. "Not after everything." As water filled his mouth, Marcus made a final violent surge toward the surface. His head broke through, and he gasped a ragged breath. The beams found him instantly. A voice through a megaphone. "Police, don't move, we're coming to get you." In that moment, as the boats converged on him and the lights blinded his eyes, Marcus Reeves knew it was over. Not just the chase or the heist, but everything that had led him here, all the injustice, all the rage, all the meticulously planned revenge. The water had won. The system had won. As hands reached down to pull him from the lake, not to save him, but to capture him, Marcus saw the bitter irony. He'd spent years trying to escape, and now, at the end, he was being rescued by the very people he'd sought to punish. 6 months earlier, Marcus Reeves sat across from his dying father in the hospice room. The old man's face was gaunt, his breathing labored. The aggressive cancer had hollowed him out in just 3 months. "They're making me sell the house," William Reeves whispered. "Need to pay the medical bills." Marcus took his father's skeletal hand. "You don't have to sell. I can help." "No." His father's voice was suddenly firm. "Your brother's savings, your sister's college fund, it's all gone. I won't take yours too." Marcus looked away, out the window at the Metro Diamond headquarters that dominated the city skyline. The corporation where his father had worked for 35 years before being laid off, just 11 months before he would have qualified for full medical benefits. The timing wasn't coincidental. Metro Diamond had done the same to dozens of employees approaching retirement age. "Dad, we can still fight this," Marcus said. "The class action is dead." William coughed painfully. "Their lawyers buried us. Judge Wilson threw it out last week." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Wilson? Nathan Wilson?" His father nodded weakly. "CEO's brother-in-law. Systems rigged, son." Marcus knew the Wilson name. Judge Nathan Wilson, whose daughter had once dated Marcus in college before her father, had made it clear that a scholarship kid from the East Side wasn't good enough for his family. "Your mother built that house," William continued, "planted every flower in that garden. Now some corporate executive will bulldoze it for a vacation property." Marcus squeezed his father's hand. "I promise you, Dad, they won't get away with this." The promise hung in the air between them. His father drifted to sleep, his breaths growing shallower. Marcus stayed until morning. By dawn, William Reeves was gone, and his son's promise hardened into something dark and immovable. In his small apartment, Marcus spread the documents across his kitchen table. Employment records, medical claims, rejection letters, court filings, the paper trail of his father's humiliation. Alongside them lay the obituaries of former Metro Diamond employees who had died without health care, news clippings about the company's record profits, and photographs of Judge Wilson at Metro Diamond charity galas. Marcus had always been methodical. It's what made him an excellent structural engineer, with an eye for pressure points and load-bearing elements. Now he applied that same precision to mapping the architecture of injustice that had killed his father. At the center of his map, CEO Richard Lombard, the man who had signed off on the strategic downsizing that targeted pre-retirement employees, the man who had testified that the company had acted within its legal rights, the man whose sister had married Judge Wilson. In his research, Marcus discovered something interesting. Lombard was a collector specifically of rare diamonds. His pride was the Mercer collection, named after Lake Mercer where his family estate stood. The collection was kept in a special vault at his lakeside mansion, to be displayed at an upcoming charity gala. Marcus stared at the photo of Lombard holding a glass of champagne, laughing with Judge Wilson at a benefit. Something crystallized inside him, clear and hard and flawless. Over the next months, Marcus transformed. The respectable engineer disappeared, replaced by a man obsessed with three things: security systems, diamonds, and revenge. He took a maintenance job at the Lombard estate, keeping his head down, observing. He learned the schedules, the blind spots, the weaknesses. He studied the family, Richard and his wife Elaine, their entitled son Richie Jr., the small army of staff who maintained their lavish lifestyle. At night, Marcus practiced lock-picking, disabling alarms, swimming across the lake and back, timing himself, building endurance. He knew that when the moment came, the water might be his only escape route. "You're working out a lot these days," commented Sarah, his neighbor, a nurse who sometimes brought him leftovers, concerned that he wasn't eating properly since his father died. "Just trying to stay healthy," Marcus replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah looked at him with worry. "You know, grief doesn't just go away if you ignore it." "I'm not ignoring it," Marcus said. "I'm honoring it." She couldn't understand what he meant, and Marcus preferred it that way. Sarah represented a life he might have had: normal, honest, connected. But that path had closed the day his father died. The night of the Metro Diamond Charity Gala arrived, a celebration of the company's commitment to community health. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He moved through the mansion in his catering uniform, invisible to the wealthy guests. He saw Judge Wilson arrive with his daughter Elizabeth, the woman who had once claimed to love Marcus before yielding to her father's disapproval. She didn't recognize the server who refilled her champagne. From the kitchen, Marcus watched Richard Lombard lead select guests to view his diamond collection. Among them was Judge Wilson, who admired the stones with appropriate reverence. "The Mercer Blue is my newest acquisition," Lombard boasted, pointing to a stunning blue diamond. "Nearly flawless, like our company's quarterly results." The men laughed. Marcus slipped away unnoticed. 3 hours later, when the gala was winding down, Marcus executed his plan. A small electrical fire in the guest bathroom, nothing dangerous, just enough to trigger alarms and create confusion. In the chaos, he moved to the vault, using the security credentials he'd carefully cloned over weeks. The diamonds were beautiful, cold, and brilliant under the emergency lights. Marcus took only what he could carry, sewing them into his specially designed jacket. The Mercer Blue went in last, nestled close to his heart. He was almost to his exit point when he rounded a corner and came face to face with Elizabeth Wilson. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Marcus, what are you?" He didn't wait to hear the rest. Marcus ran, her shouts fading behind him. He knew she would raise the alarm. His perfect plan now had a fatal flaw: a witness who could identify him. Marcus burst out of the service entrance and sprinted toward the lake. Already he could hear sirens approaching. Someone must have noticed the missing diamonds sooner than he'd anticipated. Or perhaps Elizabeth had immediately understood why her former boyfriend was at the Lombard estate. The water of Lake Mercer was black and cold as Marcus dove in. He'd practiced this swim dozens of times, but never with the added weight of the diamonds, never with adrenaline coursing through his system, never with police boats already launching from the marina. He struck out for the far shore where he'd hidden a car, but the diamonds dragged at him. The jacket, designed to be waterproof, now felt like a straitjacket. Each stroke required more effort than the last. Behind him, searchlights swept the water. The police boats were gaining rapidly. Marcus abandoned his original destination and changed course, swimming parallel to the shore, hoping to find another exit point. But his muscles were screaming now, his lungs failing to keep up with his body's desperate need for oxygen. A spotlight caught him. A voice ordered him to stop. Marcus pushed harder, but his body was shutting down. The shore remained impossibly distant. The weight of the diamonds, the weight of his revenge, was pulling him under. When his legs finally seized with cramps, Marcus knew it was over. He tread water for a few moments, then began to sink. The trial was swift and merciless. Marcus Reeves, formerly respected engineer, now notorious thief, faced Judge Nathan Wilson across the courtroom. There was no sign of recognition in the judge's eyes, just cold contempt. Elizabeth Wilson testified about seeing Marcus at the gala. Richard Lombard spoke emotionally about the violation of his home. The prosecutor painted Marcus as a deranged, jealous man striking out at success he couldn't achieve. Marcus said nothing, not during the prosecutor's character assassination, not when his public defender offered a half-hearted defense, not even when Judge Wilson sentenced him to 15 years, significantly more than the sentencing guidelines recommended. Only when the bailiff led him away did Marcus finally speak, turning to face Lombard and Wilson. "My father built your company's headquarters," he said quietly. "Did you know that? 35 years designing structures to keep you safe, and you discarded him when he got sick. You killed him as surely as if you'd put a gun to his head." The courtroom fell silent. "I stole diamonds," Marcus continued. "You stole lives. Which of us is the real thief?" Judge Wilson banged his gavel. "Remove the defendant." As they dragged him away, Marcus saw something unexpected, a flicker of doubt on Elizabeth Wilson's face. Too little, too late. Prison was its own form of drowning. Days became months, in a gray monotony of confinement. Marcus's former precision found no outlet except in counting steps across his cell, seconds between guard rotations, days until his next pointless parole hearing. News from outside rarely penetrated, but occasionally Sarah visited, bringing updates that she thought might encourage him. "There's a new investigation into Metro Diamond," she told him during one visit. "Something about systematic age discrimination. Your father's case is being mentioned." Marcus nodded, but felt nothing. Justice delayed was still justice denied. His father was still dead. The house was still gone, bulldozed for an executive tennis court. "And Elizabeth Wilson contacted me," Sarah added hesitantly. "She's been asking questions about your father's case. I think what you said in court affected her." "It doesn't matter," Marcus replied. "None of it matters anymore." Sarah reached across the table to touch his hand, but Marcus pulled away. Human connection was a luxury he could no longer afford. In his dreams, Marcus was always swimming, sometimes toward something, sometimes away, but always fighting the water, always feeling the weight pulling him down. He would wake gasping, his cell walls closing in like the dark waters of Lake Mercer. One morning, 3 years into his sentence, a guard delivered unexpected news. "You've got a visitor. Not on your approved list, but the warden signed off." In the visitation room sat Richard Lombard, Jr. Richie, the CEO's son who had barely been mentioned during the trial. "I bet you're wondering why I'm here," Richie said, leaning forward. Marcus said nothing. "I need to know where you hid them," Richie continued, lowering his voice. "The diamonds. The recovered ones were just a fraction of what you took." This was true. In his final moments in the lake, Marcus had managed to tear open the lining of his jacket, releasing most of the diamonds to sink into the murky depths. Only the Mercer blue remained on him when the police pulled him from the water. "They're gone," Marcus said simply. "Bullshit," Richie hissed. "Nobody throws away millions in diamonds. You have them stashed somewhere. And I want them." Marcus studied the younger man. "Why?" "Your father has plenty of money." "Had," Richie corrected. "Past tense. Dear old dad made some bad investments after your little stunt. He's leveraged to the eyeballs. The family name is all that's keeping us afloat. Those diamonds would solve a lot of problems." Marcus felt a strange smile form on his lips. "How unfortunate for you." Richie's face hardened. "Listen carefully. I have friends in here who can make your life very difficult. Give me the diamonds, and I'll make sure you get early parole." "The diamonds are at the bottom of Lake Mercer," Marcus replied, "where your father's conscience is buried." Richie stood abruptly. "You'll regret this." As promised, prison life became considerably worse after Richie's visit. Marcus found himself the target of both guards and inmates. Beatings became routine. His few possessions vanished. His food was tampered with. Through it all, Marcus remained silent. The lake had taught him how to drown slowly, how to accept the inevitable descent. Each new indignity was just another fathom deeper. 5 years into his sentence, Marcus received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the contents shook him from his carefully cultivated numbness. "Dear Marcus, you don't know me, but I was on the jury at your trial. I've been following the Metro Diamond investigation, and I need to tell you something. Judge Wilson was compromised. During deliberations, We were leaning toward a much lighter sentence based on the circumstances, but he instructed us improperly on sentencing guidelines. I've filed an affidavit with the State Bar Association. Other jurors have come forward too. Elizabeth Wilson provided evidence of her father's conflicts of interest. Your case is being reviewed. This won't give you back the years you've lost, but it might give you back your future. A friend. Marcus read the letter 7 times before the words fully registered. Then he did something he hadn't done since the night in the lake he wept. The hearing for judicial misconduct moved slowly, grinding through months of legal procedures. Marcus allowed himself a dangerous emotion: hope. Sarah visited more frequently, bringing newspaper clippings about the growing scandal. Metro Diamond was under federal investigation. Judge Wilson had taken a leave of absence. Richard Lombard had resigned as CEO. Your father would be proud, Sarah told him. You exposed something important. Marcus shook his head. At what cost? I became the very thing I hated: someone who destroyed lives for personal gain. You were drowning in grief, Sarah said. People make desperate choices when they're drowning. On the day of the final hearing, Marcus was transported to the courthouse. The same courtroom where he'd been sentenced now looked different, smaller, less imposing. Judge Wilson wasn't present, replaced by a judge from another district. Elizabeth Wilson was there, sitting behind the prosecutor's table. She didn't look at Marcus. The new judge reviewed the evidence of judicial misconduct, the improper sentencing, the conflicts of interest. He spoke in a measured tone about the integrity of the justice system. Marcus barely heard the words. He was watching a different drama unfold at the back of the courtroom, where Richard Lombard had entered, followed by his son. The former CEO looked haggard, aged beyond his years. Richie looked anxious, his eyes darting around the room. The judge's voice cut through Marcus's observations. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, I am vacating the sentence of Marcus Reeves and ordering his immediate release. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marcus felt Sarah squeeze his arm in excitement, but he remained still, waiting for the other shoe to drop. However, the judge continued, the conviction for theft remains on Mr. Reeves's record. The judicial misconduct affected the sentencing, not the verdict itself. And there it was, freedom, but not exoneration. A half-justice that mirrored the half-truths of his own revenge. As Marcus stood to leave the courtroom a free man, Richie Lombard pushed past him, whispering, This isn't over. Those diamonds are still mine. Marcus watched the Lombards exit, father and son united in their fallen pride. Elizabeth Wilson followed, pausing briefly to meet Marcus's eyes. There was an apology there, perhaps even a question, but Marcus turned away. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. The world outside prison was another kind of confinement. Marcus couldn't find work with a felony record. Former colleagues avoided him. The settlement from the judicial misconduct case covered his basic needs, but left him adrift, purposeless. He took to visiting Lake Mercer, sitting on the shore opposite the Lombard estate, now sold to cover debts. Sometimes he would swim, pushing himself until exhaustion, trying to recapture the clarity he'd felt that night when everything had changed. On one such evening, as dusk settled over the water, Marcus noticed a boat approaching his secluded spot. As it drew closer, he recognized Richie Lombard at the helm. I thought I might find you here, Richie called, cutting the engine and drifting toward shore. Still communing with your stolen treasure? Marcus said nothing, watching as Richie stepped from the boat, unsteady on his feet. The younger Lombard had clearly been drinking. You know what's funny? Richie slurred, approaching Marcus. After everything, the trial, the scandal, my family's disgrace here, still just a thief sitting on a fortune while we lost everything. I told you before, Marcus replied. The diamonds are gone. Liar! Richie shouted, lunging forward suddenly. Marcus sidestepped easily, but Richie's momentum carried him past, stumbling toward the water's edge. His foot caught on a rock, and with a startled cry, he pitched forward into the lake. Marcus waited for him to surface, but seconds stretched into a minute. Richie had fallen face first, possibly knocked unconscious by the rocks. Without thinking, Marcus dove in. The irony wasn't lost on him, once again entering these waters, once again with life hanging in the balance. He found Richie a few feet down, unmoving, and dragged him to the surface. On shore, Marcus performed CPR, forcing water from Richie's lungs, compelling his heart to beat. When Richie finally coughed and sputtered back to consciousness, Marcus sat back, exhausted. "You?" Richie gasped, staring up at his rescuer. "You saved me. Why?" Marcus had no answer that made sense, even to himself. Richie's next words came out as a broken whisper. "I can't swim. Never learned. Too afraid of the water." He laughed bitterly. "And now, you've seen me drown. Poetic, isn't it?" They sat in silence as darkness fell completely. Finally, Richie spoke again. "My father died last month. Heart attack. The last thing he said to me was that I'd never be half the man he was." Richie shook his head. "And he wasn't half the man your father was." Marcus looked at him sharply. "I found the personnel files," Richie explained. "After everything fell apart, I saw what they did to your father. What my father did." He met Marcus's gaze. "I would have done the same thing you did." 3 days later, Marcus received a package. Inside was a small, blue diamond, the Mercer Blue, the one piece of evidence the police had recovered from his jacket. A note accompanied it. "The case was officially closed yesterday. Evidence released. This belongs to you more than it ever did to us. Consider it reparations woefully inadequate, but a start." It was signed, simply, R.L. Jr. Marcus held the diamond up to the light. Once, it had represented everything he wanted: justice, revenge, retribution. Now it felt like nothing more than a cold, hard stone. That evening, he returned to Lake Mercer one last time. He waded into the water until it reached his chest. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent the Mercer Blue arcing through the air to disappear with a small splash, joining its companions at the bottom of the lake. Marcus turned back toward shore, where Sarah waited. She had offered him a place to stay until he figured out his next steps. Perhaps there was still a future to build, even from the wreckage of the past. As he waded out of the lake, Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. The water no longer sought to drag him down. The weight he'd carried, of grief, of rage, of revenge, remained behind, settled into the darkness with the diamonds. Justice, Marcus had learned, was as elusive and refractive as a diamond's brilliance, sometimes visible only from certain angles, often distorted by the very structures designed to protect it. And revenge, that cold companion, offered no warmth in the end. He had nearly drowned pursuing both. Now, finally, he could breathe. But as Marcus reached the shore, he saw 2 figures approaching from the darkness: police officers, their faces grim. "Marcus Reeves," one called. "We need to ask you some questions about the death of Richard Lombard." Sarah gasped beside him. Marcus felt the familiar weight settle back onto his shoulders. "It wasn't a heart attack?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The officer shook his head. "Evidence suggests poisoning, and according to his son, you had motive." Marcus looked back at the dark water of Lake Mercer. The momentary freedom he'd felt evaporated like mist. The system that had failed his father, failed him, and even failed the Lombards in the end, now reached for him again. As the officers led him away in handcuffs, Marcus understood the final injustice. Even when you think you've escaped the water, you can still drown on dry land. Sarah called after him, promising to find a lawyer to fight. But Marcus knew better now. Some currents were too strong to fight, some depths too great to survive. The diamonds would remain at the bottom of Lake Mercer, untouched and perfect in their darkness, while above, the ripples of injustice continued to spread, touching everything in their path. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video.